let's start. On behalf of all of us here at Phillips and Company, we'd like to thank all of you for joining us today on our third Zoom speaker series. We hope you and your loved ones are safe and healthy in this unprecedented time. We have an interesting speaker and some interactive surveys for you today. And if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A button and we'll have time at the end to have our speaker answer those. Before we start and before I introduce Morgan, I was asked, hey, why do we have a writer and a storyteller as a speaker? Why not an economist or a market forecaster? It was a great question. And again, before I introduce Morgan, I'm going to tell a little story of my own. The story dates back to 1961 and Sandy Koufax, who was one of the greatest lefty pitchers in baseball history. Now, most know who Koufax is, but very few really know the name Norm Sherry. Norm was this bullpen catcher from the Dodgers, and one day told Koufax, who had kind of this career control problem, he was a sloppy pitcher, hey, take a little heat off your pitch, throw the ball so I can catch it. That led to one of the greatest turnarounds in a Hall of Fame career for Koufax. And you can see, his ERAs, if you're a baseball aficionado, were pretty terrible until he ran into Norm Sherry. And in many regards, kind of we're in the same business. We're in the business of throwing pitches so you, our clients, can catch them. We often explain abstract concepts that are counterintuitive, like compounding interest, discounting, the future, and risk. And for us, telling great stories makes those elusive concepts come to life. It makes us more effective and it makes you more successful. And so let me connect all of that to Morgan. Morgan is an award-winning financial storyteller in the highest compliment that helps us deliver a pitch that can be caught by you. In my opinion, he's the best financial writer since Michael Lewis. He's published a new book, The Psychology of Money. Not only is it great for seasoned pros that, like me, that spent 30 years in this business, but I've even had my young kids who are in their early 20s read his book because it makes so much sense. So Morgan, welcome, and we look forward to having you tell us some stories that help us understand some of these elusive concepts.
Thank you so much for having me, Tim, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to do this. It's always good to do these in person, but in this year, I'm glad that we can still do something like this online and virtually. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen today. I have some slides for you that I'm going to begin my presentation with. So just bear with me for one moment here while I get this up and running. Oh. There we go. What I want to talk to you about today is the psychology of money. And as Tim just mentioned, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your money or where I think the economy or the stock market is going next. What I want to talk about, I think, is more important, but is often overlooked in this industry, which is just what happens in your head when you try to do things with money. And I want to start today with a story of two investors, neither of whom knew each other, but their paths crossed in a very interesting way about 10 years ago. The first investor named Grace Groner. Grace Groner was born on a farm just outside of Chicago in 1910, and she had kind of a hard life. She was orphaned as a child. She never had kids. She never went to college. She lived in a room house for almost her entire life, and she worked secretary for her entire career. She was accounts for those who knew her, a lovely woman, but she had kind of a hard, kind of under the radar life. And Grace Groner died in 2010. She was 100 years old. And when she died, she shocked all of those who knew her, who learned that she left $7 million to charity. And everyone who knew her said, where did Grace, this orphaned secretary who lived by herself, where did she get $7 million? And they dug through her papers. They tried to figure out where it came from. And they realized that there was no secret. There was no lottery winnings. There was no inheritance. Where she got her money was she invested what little she could save from her job as a secretary. She invested it in the stock market and she left it alone for 80 years. And that was her whole story. That was it. The second investor I want to talk to you about today is a guy named Richard. I'll leave out his last name, but Richard had almost the exact opposite upbringing of Grace Groner. He was a very wealthy family. He went to Harvard. He got his MBA from the University of Chicago. He went to work on Wall Street in the 1980s and truly became one of the most important men in all of global finance. He was a vice chairman of Merrill Lynch. He ran one of their largest divisions. He retired in his early 40s to pursue charitable activities. That's how successful he was in his career on Wall Street. 3 weeks after Grace Gronder died, Richard filed for personal bankruptcy. He told the judge the financial crisis of 2008 had completely wiped him out. He had no income, no assets, so much so that his only ability to buy food for his family was selling the furniture out of his house. And what I think is interesting about these two stories, the juxtaposition of these two stories, is not to tell you be more like Grace and less like Richard. That's not the point. What's interesting about these stories is that there's no other industry where those two stories are even possible. There's no other industry where someone with no education, no background, no training, no experience can massively outperform someone who has the background, the best training, the best education, the best experience. It does not happen in any other field. It's impossible to think of Grace Gronder performing open heart surgery better than a Harvard-trained cardiologist. It would never happen, but that does happen in it. And what that shows is something that's really important in this industry that often goes overlooked, which is that good investing is not necessarily about what you know. It's not about how smart you are or where you went to school, how sophisticated the forecasting models you use are. That's not what good investing is about. Good investing is overwhelmingly about how you behave. It's about your relationship with greed and fear and your ability to take a long-term mindset, how gullible you are, who you trust, who you seek information. And those things, of course, are not analytical exercises. Those are all behavioral, psychological exercises. And the thing about behavior that's really important, behavior is hard to teach, even to very smart people. Since behavior is not analytical, you can't sum it up with charts and formulas that you can memorize. It's not really clean and elegant. It's a soft, mushy topic. So it's easy to discount it, sweep it under the rug in investing, which is tend to be taught as a math-based field, even if we know that the behavioral side of investing is one of the most important aspects of investing. So what do we do about this as investors? To me, since behavior is not analytical, since we can't memorize charts and formulas, the only way to really wrap your head around behavioral finance and the psychology of money is with stories, as Tim mentioned earlier. Stories about real people dealing with risk, dealing with uncertainty that hopefully you can empathize with and try to wrap your head around. Think about the behavioral side of investing, whether it's for you or your clients or your family members, whoever you're working with, to understand the side of investing in a more productive way. So what I want to do today is share with you 4 stories, none of which have anything to do with investing at all, but all of them have a pretty clear takeaway about how we can think about the behavioral side of investing, the behavioral side of risk in a more productive way. So the first story I want to share with you today, let me get this going, here we go, is that timing is meaningless, but time is everything. And like I said, the story has nothing to do with investing. The story has to do with ice ages. We have known in the history of this planet, there has been 5 distinct ice ages where the Earth basically from pole to pole turns into a giant ice cube like this. We've known this has been the case for hundreds of years. It's very clear in the geological record. And for most of that period, we have had a rough idea about why this occurs. There's tilts in the Earth axis that pushes it closer or away or further away from the sun in a way that has a big impact patterns that can turn the Earth into a giant ice cube like this. Until about 100 years ago, most scientists thought that the dynamic that actually got this going, that actually started an ice age, was that we would start having brutally cold and vicious winters from pole to pole that would change weather patterns and would drop a bunch of snow and ice and it would compound on itself until we got this frozen Earth. About years ago, though, scientists who were looking at the geological record realized that the actual dynamic that got an ice age going was the opposite of what we had occurred. How ice ages begin that we now know is not when winters get very vicious. It's actually the opposite. It starts with a moderately cool summer where the previous winter snow melt does not melt. When the previous winter snow doesn't melt and sticks around all summer, you start winter with a base of snow that didn't melt from the winter. And therefore that winter, more snow accumulates because you started with a strong base. Since more snow accumulates that winter, the next summer you have less summer snow melt. And then this process just goes on and it repeats and it compounds on itself. You start with a moderate summer when a little bit of snow that just doesn't melt sticks around to the next year. And then that process just compounds and it grows from there. Now, it's not intuitive, of course, that you could start with our normal planet Earth, and then you have a moderately cool summer. And the next thing you know, tens of thousands of years later, the Earth is a giant snowball. But that's how ice ages works. It is not intuitive to think that what seems like a tiny, meaningless change in starting variables, like a cool summer where a little bit of snow sticks around, can literally set off a reaction that turns the entire planet into an ice cube. But that is what happens. The power of compounding, of changing a little bit of slight variable at one point and letting it grow over time is never intuitive. Even if you understand, and you're a smart person, you're a finance person, you understand compounding, the power of a change in one small, seemingly meaningless variable is never intuitive. And that is also true in investing. Let me show you what I mean. This is Warren Buffett's net worth during the course of his life by age, going back 14 through today at about age 90. This is net worth by this age. Two things should stick out from this chart, really important. One is that Warren Buffett was fairly wealthy at a young age. By the time he was 20 years old, his net worth was about $100,000. Adjusted for inflation, that's something like $3 million. So by the time he was very young, he was very successful at investing, and he got this early start that got him going. The second thing that should be really clear from this chart is that the vast majority of his net worth came after his 60th birthday. 97% of Warren Buffett's net worth came after his 65th birthday. 9% came after his 50th birthday. So these two things, the fact that Warren Buffett started so early, he was very successful in his teenage years, and he keeps investing through age 90, where the majority of his net worth has come from in his elderly years, is a very important part of his story. Because let's think of a hypothetical world where two small, seemingly meaningless variables were slightly different. Let's assume Warren Buffett didn't start investing at age 14 or age 10. Age 10 actually is when he began. Let's assume he started investing at age 25, like a normal person. And let's assume that he retired at age 65, like a normal person might, rather than investing through age 90 like he has. And let's assume in this hypothetical world that he earned the same average investing returns during this period. He was as successful and as talented as he has been. But let's assume he started at a normal age and retired at a normal age. What would his net worth be in that situation if he started at age 25 and retired at age 65? The answer is not 90 billion as his current net worth is. The answer is actually about 12 million. 99.9% less is what his net worth would be if he started investing at a normal age and retired at a normal age. Look, is Warren Buffett a successful investor, a good investor? Yes, of course. But his secret is that he's been a successful investor for 80 years. And that is very easy to overlook for the throngs of investors who admire him in this industry. Where if you go onto Amazon, there are about 2,000 books that are in some way dedicated to answering the question, how has Warren done what he's done? And they go into grand detail about how Buffett thinks about moats and business and market cycles. And they're great books and make good points. But 99.9% of his net worth can literally be tied to just the amount of time that he has been investing for. I think it's just too simple an explanation for most people to take seriously. It's not intuitive that a tiny change in variables makes all the difference in the world. That's how compounding works. And it's easy particularly for people that have a lot of financial sophistication and knowledge to overlook something that simple. But the best investing technique that you can do for yourself or for other people is always, it's not to improve your investing returns, it's to increase the amount of time you are investing for. So two takeaways from that. I think most investing mistakes come from the question, what will happen next? What is the economy going to do next? What's the stock market going to do next? That is the basis for most regrettable investing decisions that lead to mistakes. Most investing fortunes, most investing successes come from asking the question, how long can I stay investing for? And again, I think the single best thing anyone can do to improve their investing returns and let compounding work and the magic that it is to increase the amount of time that you are investing for.